For 7 years now, my hand has been reaching out to the empty half of the bed every morning. Sometimes in my sleep, I still hear Lydia getting up before me to make tea. My subconscious plays a dirty trick on me, making me believe for a split second that she has just gone to the kitchen. But then I open my eyes and see the faded wallpaper in our bedroom, which we once chose together. The dull pattern of cornflowers now looks like nothing more than a gray stain in the morning light. I am 73 years old and live alone in a house I built with my own hands. In Carver's Bridge, I am known as Morven Tallis, a former electrician who spent 35 years fixing wiring throughout the town. My hands are not what they used to be. My joints creak like unlubricated hinges. But I can still replace an outlet or rewire my own house. And that's enough for me. On this Sunday morning, I was doing what has become my usual ritual in recent years, looking through old photo albums. In the worn pictures, Lydia was smiling, very young, with our son Declan in her arms. Then there were pictures from our vacation at the lakes. Then Declan's graduation, his wedding. The further back I went, the fewer pictures there were, until the pages of the album were empty, waiting for a continuation that would never come. A phone call interrupted my meditation on the past. I didn't like it when people called on Sundays. At my age, you don't expect anything good from unexpected calls. "Dad, it's me." Declan's voice sounded tense, as if he was about to announce someone's death. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately. "We have a problem with the apartment. The landlord suddenly terminated the lease. We have to move out within a week." I paused. My son called me about once every 2 months, usually on holidays or when he needed something. I already guessed where he was going with this. "We need somewhere to stay until we find a new place," Declan continued. "Maybe we could stay with you?" "For a couple of months at most." I stared at the empty wall opposite. There used to be a portrait of Lydia there, but I put it away in the closet. It was too painful to see it every day. "When are you coming?" was all I asked. "Tomorrow, if possible." Vanessa is already panicking about all this. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, the woman who in 20 years never found the time to learn how to cook the dishes my son loves, who always looked at me as if I were an unavoidable evil she had to put up with during the holidays. "Okay," I replied. "The room upstairs is free." "Thanks, Dad. We'll try not to bother you." After that conversation, I sat in my chair for a long time, looking out the window at my garden. Lydia and I had once planted a flower bed here, but now only grass grew there, which I mowed occasionally. The thought that my measured life would be disrupted caused me vague anxiety. But in the end, Declan is my son, and it's only for a couple of months. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual and began preparing for the guests' arrival. I dusted the furniture in the guest room, changed the bedding, and washed the floors. I tried not to think about how Vanessa would wrinkle her nose when she discovered that the curtains were faded and the mattress was too hard. They arrived after lunch. Declan's old sedan stopped at the gate, and I watched from the window as they unloaded their suitcases. There were not 2 or 3, but 6. For a couple of months, it seemed excessive. "Dad!" Declan hugged me at the door. He had put on weight since we last met, and his hair had turned gray. "Thank you for taking us in." "Hello, Morwen." Vanessa held out her hand for a handshake. She never called me Dad or even Mr. Tallis. Always by name, as if we were the same age. "I hope we're not imposing too much." I helped them carry their things into the house. Vanessa immediately began to look around, and I noticed her gaze linger on the worn carpet in the living room and my collection of old radio parts on the shelf. "Can we have the upstairs room?" Declan asked, even though I had already prepared it for them. "Of course," I nodded. "The bathtub works, but the boiler is old. If you want hot water in the evening, you need to turn it on an hour in advance." "Is there a shower?" Vanessa asked. "Only a bath." She exchanged glances with Declan, and I could almost hear the unspoken, "I told you so." The first evening passed in tense politeness. I made dinner, roast beef according to Lydia's recipe. Declan ate 2 servings, praising it like he did when he was a child. Vanessa barely touched her plate. "Very homey," she said, pushing her food away. "But I'm on a diet." After dinner, I went to my room, leaving them to settle in. Through the thin walls, I could hear their muffled voices and footsteps. They were moving things around, unpacking. I didn't want to interfere. After all, they needed to settle in. In the morning, I woke up at my usual time of 6 o'clock. I quietly went down to the kitchen so as not to wake the guests, and found that Vanessa was already there. She was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, typing something quickly on her laptop. "Good morning," I greeted her. Ah, Morwen, she said without even looking up. There's coffee in the coffee maker. I bought a new one. Yours was antique. I looked at the countertop. My old coffee maker, which had served me faithfully for 15 years, was gone. In its place was a shiny chrome machine with a dozen buttons. Where's mine? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Oh, I put it in the storage room. It took up too much space. I silently opened the refrigerator. There had been changes there too. Instead of my usual groceries, there were jars of yogurt, some green smoothies, and packages labeled gluten-free. I did a little rearranging, Vanessa said, finally looking up from the screen. I hope you don't mind. I just wanted to tidy up a bit. This is my house, I said quietly, and I had it tidy. Of course, she smiled the kind of smile usually given to a capricious child. I just thought we could optimize the space a little. You know, a modern approach. I didn't argue. I made myself some toast and tea. I didn't feel like drinking coffee from the new machine, and went out into the garden. There, among the old apple trees that Lydia and I had once planted, I could think in peace. The first week dragged on slowly. Declan left early in the morning for work and returned late in the evening. Vanessa worked remotely, and the house was filled with the sounds of her phone conversations all day long. I tried to keep a low profile, spending most of my time in my room or in the garage where I had a small workshop. On Friday evening, when the three of us were having dinner, Declan tried to lighten the mood. Dad, how are you? What have you been up to this week? The usual, I replied. I fixed Bertram's radio. Are you still messing around with that junk? Vanessa asked in surprise. Nowadays, there's internet radio, podcasts. I like fixing things, I replied simply. When something is broken, I know how to fix it. How's the search for a new apartment going? I asked Declan, changing the subject. My son and Vanessa exchanged quick glances. Nothing suitable yet, Declan replied. Prices have skyrocketed, and what's available is either too small or in a bad neighborhood. We may have to stay a little longer, Vanessa added. I hope you don't mind, Morwen. What could I say? No, take your 6 suitcases and get out. He's my son, even if he only calls when he needs something. Of course, stay as long as you need, I replied. On Saturday morning, I woke up to a noise. Someone was moving furniture. I quickly got dressed and went downstairs. In the living room, Vanessa was bossing Declan around as he tried to move my old bookcase. What's going on? I asked. Oh, Morwen. Vanessa turned around. We decided to freshen things up a bit. This bookcase blocks the window and makes the room look gloomy. That bookcase has been here for 30 years, I said. Lydia chose the spot for it herself. At the mention of my late wife's name, Declan froze. Vanessa just waved it off. But that was so long ago. You need to redecorate at least once a decade. Dad, Declan tried to smooth things over. We just wanted to do what was best. The house is a little outdated. This is my house. I felt anger rising inside me. And I didn't get permission to move the furniture around. But we live here now, Vanessa objected. Can't we create a comfortable environment? I looked at my living room, which was now unrecognizable. The armchair where I used to read in the evenings had been moved into a corner. Some abstract paintings had appeared on the wall. My collection of radio parts had disappeared from the shelf, replaced by decorative candles and figurines. Where are my things? I asked. I put them in a box in the storage room, Vanessa replied. They were gathering dust and looked like junk. The word junk hit me harder than a slap in the face. These weren't just parts, they were memories. Every transistor, every microchip reminded me of the projects I had worked on, of the people whose devices I had repaired. Declan, put the cabinet back where it was, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, and put my things back where they were. Dad, but this is my house, I repeated, and as long as it is, everything will stay where it belongs. I turned and left without waiting for their reaction. I needed some fresh air. In the garden, I sat down on an old bench and stared at the apple trees for a long time. They were old too, with cracked bark, but they still bore fruit every year. When I returned to the house an hour later, the wardrobe was back in its place, but my collection had not been returned to the shelf. In the days that followed, I began to notice other changes. There were new towels and rugs in the bathroom. In the kitchen, there were new pots and pans. My old things were disappearing one by one, as if by magic. One evening, I couldn't find my favorite mug, the one Lydia gave me on our 30th wedding anniversary. Vanessa, have you seen my blue mug? I asked, looking into the living room where she was watching some TV series. Oh, the cracked one? I threw it away, she replied, without looking up from the screen. It was really old. I bought a new set of dishes, look in the cupboard. I stood there, unable to say a word. The mug was cracked, yes, but I had glued it back together myself and used it every day for the last 10 years. You had no right, I finally managed to say. Morwen, it's just an old mug. She looked at me in bewilderment. There are too many sentimental things in the house. Sometimes you just have to let go of the past. I didn't answer. I went back to the kitchen, picked up one of the new mugs, a plain white one, and made some tea. But I didn't drink it. I just sat there and watched the steam rise. When Declan came home that evening, I heard them whispering and arguing in their room. Fragments of sentences drifted through the thin walls. Becoming a problem, needs more time, doesn't understand modern standards. The next morning, Declan came up to me while I was working in the garden. Dad, I wanted to apologize for the mug, he began. Vanessa didn't know it was so important to you. It's not about the mug, Declan, I replied, wiping my hands on my old jeans. It's about respect. This is my house. My memories live here. I understand. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture he had developed as a child when he was nervous. It's just that Vanessa, she has her own idea of what a house should look like. Then she should buy her own, I said, and immediately regretted it. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it that way. No, you're right, Declan sighed. We're working on it. It's just financially difficult right now. He didn't finish, but I understood. They weren't looking for a new apartment. They were planning to stay here. That evening, I discovered that all my old medications had been thrown out of the bathroom and replaced with some trendy vitamins and supplements. Morin, those pills were expired, Vanessa explained when I asked her about it. I was just looking out for your health. My heart medication was among them, I objected. It wasn't expired. Oh, she was taken aback for a moment. I didn't know. But we can get a new prescription. I have a pharmacist friend. I said nothing and went to my room. There, closing the door, I took a spare pack of pills from the nightstand, which I had prudently kept separately. As an electrician, I had always understood the importance of backup systems. As the days passed, the house became less and less mine. New curtains, new cushions on the sofa, new paintings on the walls. Lydia's photos disappeared from the living room, replaced by faceless landscapes and abstract patterns. One day I came back from the store and found that my armchair, the one I spent my evenings reading in, was gone. In its place was a modern one with straight lines and thin armrests. Where's my chair? I asked Vanessa, who was cooking something in the kitchen. Oh, Declan and I decided to give you a gift, she smiled. Your old chair was completely worn out. It must have hurt your back. The new one is orthopedic, specially designed for older people. For older people, I looked at this unfamiliar chair, imagined myself sitting in it, as if in a hospital ward, and felt like I was suffocating. I didn't ask for a gift, I said. Where's my chair? We donated it to a charity shop, Vanessa sighed. Morwen, why are you being so stubborn? We're trying to help. I left the house without saying another word. I walked aimlessly until I found myself in a park on the other side of town. Sitting on a public bench, I realized that I had become a stranger in my own home, that every day something disappears, not just things, but the memories associated with them. When I returned in the evening, Declan tried to talk to me. Dad, I know you're upset about the chair, but it really was old. We wanted what was best. Declan, I looked at my son, whom I had once taught to ride a bike, fix electrical outlets, and be a man. When are you planning to move out? He looked away, and that gesture told me everything I needed to know. We're looking at options, but housing is so difficult right now, and Vanessa thinks there's enough room for everyone here. If we redecorate a little, renovate the interior, I repeated. You mean get rid of everything that reminds you that this is my home? Of Lydia? Of our life here? Dad, it's been 7 years, Declan said quietly. Maybe it really is time to move on? I didn't answer. I just went to my room, the only place that remained untouched. But I already knew it was only a matter of time. The next day when I returned from my walk, I found the door to my room open. Inside, Vanessa was going through the things in my closet. What are you doing? I asked, stopping in the doorway. Oh, Morven! She jumped in surprise. I was just helping to tidy up. You have so many old things that you could give away. Get out of my room, I said quietly but firmly, right now. I don't understand why you're reacting this way, she frowned. I'm just trying to help organize the space. I didn't ask for help, especially in my room. Get out! Vanessa pursed her lips but left. At the door, she turned around. You know, Morwen, you're very difficult. Declan and I are trying to create a modern, comfortable home, and you're clinging to the past. It's not healthy. After she left, I locked the door and sat down on the bed. The quiet changes in my home no longer seemed so quiet. They were like a tide, slow but relentless, washing away everything I knew and loved. And I began to realize that soon I might find myself a stranger within the walls I had built myself. This house used to be my fortress. Now I felt like an uninvited guest in it. Every morning I would go down to the kitchen, wondering what else had changed overnight. That Tuesday morning, I discovered that the refrigerator had been completely rearranged. My groceries now occupied only one small shelf at the bottom, while the rest of the space was filled with labeled containers, smoothie jars, and some exotic fruits. Good morning, Morwen. Vanessa was sitting at the table, looking at something on her tablet. I reorganized the refrigerator a little. I set aside a separate shelf for your groceries so that nothing would get mixed up. I silently opened my shelf. The cheese I bought at the market was gone, as was the smoked fish I loved to eat for breakfast. Where's my cheese? I asked. Oh, it had mold on it, she replied without looking up. I threw it away. It was blue cheese, I said, feeling my facial muscles tense. Expensive French cheese. Really? She finally looked at me with a slightly surprised expression. It looked completely spoiled. In any case, cheeses like that are very unhealthy, especially at your age. At my age, a phrase that had become her favorite weapon. I've been eating cheese like that for 40 years, I replied, and I intend to eat it for another 40. Vanessa gave a short laugh, as if I had made a joke, and returned to her tablet. By the way, Declan and I thought it would be more convenient if you had breakfast after 9. Until then, I have work video calls in the kitchen, and the extra noise is distracting. I glanced at my watch. It was 7:30. I'd been eating breakfast at 7 my whole life. This is my house, I reminded her, and I'll eat breakfast when it suits me. Of course, she smiled with the same indulgent smile she always had. I just thought we could make some kind of schedule so that everyone would be comfortable. After all, we are a family. I didn't argue. I took out some bread, made toast, spread butter on it, and left, taking a cup of tea with me. To my room, like a guilty child. That evening, Declan brought home a flat box. What's that? I asked when he dragged it into the living room. A new TV, my son replied proudly. It's ultra-thin, smart, can be connected to the internet, and you can watch movies without discs. I looked at my old TV, which still worked perfectly well. Yes, the screen wasn't as big as modern models, but it was enough for me. Why, was all I asked. Dad, your TV is from the analog era. Soon they won't be supported at all. Vanessa was already opening the box, taking out a shiny black screen no thicker than a finger. You'll see, Morwen, what a difference it makes, she said. We'll connect all the services for you, and you'll be able to watch any program. In the evening, they mounted the new TV on the wall, removing my old one from the nightstand. They also got rid of the nightstand. It takes up too much space. I sat in my new orthopedic chair, watching the last traces of my former life disappear one by one. When the TV was set up, Declan handed me a thin remote control with dozens of buttons. Here, look, he began to explain, pressing one button after another. Here's the menu. Here are the settings. Here you can select the service you want to watch. I looked at the remote, then at my son. 20 years ago, I taught him how to fix a blown fuse. Now he was teaching me how to turn on the TV. Okay, was all I said as I took the remote. When they went upstairs, I sat in front of the dark screen for a long time without turning it on. My gaze wandered around the room, which was becoming less and less familiar with each passing day. New carpet, new light fixtures. Even the smell was different. Some kind of synthetic scent from the electric air freshener that Vanessa had installed in the corner. I got up and went to my study, a small room next to the kitchen where I kept my tools, electronics, books, and bills. Opening the door, I froze in the doorway. The room had been transformed. My desk was gone. In its place was a treadmill and some exercise equipment. A large mirror hung on the wall. Do you like it? Vanessa's voice came from behind me. Declan and I decided to set up a gym. It's good for our health. I slowly turned around. Oh, where are my things? In the garage, she shrugged. Everything is neatly packed in boxes. We thought you rarely use this room anyway, and you need to exercise regularly. I use this room every day. My voice was quiet, but I could feel my hands shaking. This is my office. My books, my tools, my accounts are here. Morwen, you're retired, she spread her arms. Why do you need a whole room for papers? Besides, everything can be stored electronically now. I can teach you how to use cloud storage. I didn't answer. I just turned around and went to the garage. There, among the cobwebs and dust, were boxes with my things. They were carelessly piled up and labeled with sloppy handwriting. Old papers, tools, junk. Opening one of them, I saw my notebooks. The ones in which I had kept track of all the work I had done since the days when I repaired wiring throughout the city. In another box were photo albums, including the one I had been looking at on the day of Declan's call. In the third were my tools, many of which I had inherited from my father. I sat down right on the concrete floor, surrounded by these boxes, and for the first time in a long time, I felt tears welling up in my throat. Not out of self-pity, but out of helplessness. Out of the realization that I was being methodically erased from my own home. When I returned to the house, I heard Declan and Vanessa talking in the kitchen. "Ain't too abrupt," Declan said. "We should have discussed it with him first." "He wouldn't have agreed anyway," Vanessa replied. "You know how stubborn he is. Sometimes it's easier to present him with a fait accompli. After all, we're doing this for his own good too. I'm not sure that throwing away his things without asking is for his own good." "Declan," Vanessa's voice took on a steely tone, "we've already discussed this. If we want to live here normally, we need space. And your father, he just doesn't understand that it's time to move on. All this sentimentality about old things isn't healthy." I quietly walked past the kitchen to my room. If we want to live here normally. So they really were planning to stay for a long time, maybe forever. The next few days turned into a silent standoff. I tried to spend as little time at home as possible, leaving early in the morning and returning late at night. I walked in the park, sat in the library, visited old friends, anything to avoid seeing my home turn into a foreign space. But the changes continued. One day I discovered that the door to my bedroom didn't lock. The lock had been removed. "It's for your safety, Morwen," Vanessa explained when I asked about it. "What if you get sick at night? How will we get inside?" "I'm 73, not 93, I objected, "and I want my privacy to be respected." "Of course," she nodded with the same indulgent smile. "But safety is more important. Besides, locked doors create a bad atmosphere in the family, don't you think?" After that, I began to notice that my things in my room were periodically rearranged. It was as if someone had come in and tidied up. Nothing was missing, but everything was not where I had left it. On Friday evening, I was sitting in the backyard when Declan approached me. "Dad," he began uncertainly, "I wanted to talk about the situation." "Which situation?" I asked. "The fact that my things are being thrown away? Or that my study has been turned into a gym? Or maybe the fact that I can't lock my bedroom door?" Declan sighed and sat down next to me on the bench. "I know Vanessa can be pushy sometimes," he said, "but she means well. She just has her own idea of what a modern home should look like. But this is my home, Declan." I looked him in the eye. "The house I built with my own hands. Where I lived with your mother for 35 years. And you're letting your wife throw out my things and tell me how to live?" "I'm trying to find a compromise," he looked away. "But you know Vanessa, she's very determined." "Determined. An interesting euphemism for rude." "Son," I put my hand on his shoulder, "I used to teach you to stand up for yourself. I told you that a man should have his own opinion. What happened to that boy?" Declan stood up abruptly. "You don't understand, Dad. Times have changed. Things are different now. And yes, I have my own opinion. It's just that sometimes you have to compromise for the sake of peace in the family, even if it means letting them throw away the memory of your mother." He flinched as if struck. "Don't bring Mom into this," his voice hardened. "That's not fair." "Unfair?" I stood up too. "You know what's unfair? That you came to my house, said you'd stay for a couple of months, and now you're turning it into your home without asking my opinion. That's what's unfair, Declan." He looked at me for a few seconds, then shook his head. "You just don't want to accept change, Dad. The world doesn't stand still. And Vanessa and I, we need our own space too." With that, he went back into the house, leaving me alone in the garden, among the apple trees, which now seemed to be the only witnesses to my former life. The following week, something happened that I would call the final straw. Returning home after a trip to the library, I discovered that my books, an old collection of technical literature, novels that Lydia and I had read, architecture albums, had disappeared from the shelves in the living room. In their place were glossy design magazines, some contemporary novels, and books on psychology. Where are my books? I asked Vanessa, who was arranging decorative candles on the coffee table. They were taken to a charity shop, she replied matter-of-factly. They took up too much space, and many of them were so old that they were falling apart. I chose some good modern books to replace them. You'll like them. They contain a lot of useful information about healthy living. I stood there unable to believe what I had heard. My books. Some of them I had collected over the years. Others were gifts from Lydia. Still others were memories of friends, colleagues, times when my mind was sharper and my hands were stronger. How could you? I asked quietly. These aren't your things. Morwen, she sighed as if explaining the obvious to a child. No one has read these books in years. They were just gathering dust and taking up space. Now they will be of use to someone else. That's not for you to decide. I felt anger rising inside me. You have no right to dispose of my things. We live here. She straightened up, looking at me defiantly. And we need space for our things. We can't live among museum exhibits. I looked at her and suddenly realized one simple thing. To Vanessa, I myself was such an exhibit. Outdated, unnecessary, taking up space. Something to be gotten rid of in order to make room for modern life. Where's Declan? I asked. At work, of course, as she turned away, continuing to arrange the candles. He'll be back late. He has an important project. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat down on the bed. My things were still around me. Photographs, clothes, a few books that I kept in my bedroom. But I knew it wouldn't be for long. Soon the changes would reach here too. In the evening, Declan knocked on my door. Dad, can I come in? I didn't answer, so he came in himself. He sat down next to me on the bed. Vanessa said you were upset about the book, he began. I didn't know she was going to give them away. If you want, we can try to get them back. No need, I interrupted him. It doesn't matter anymore. Dad, tell me honestly, Declan. I looked him in the eye. You're not going to move out, are you? You plan to stay here. For good. He looked away, and that spoke louder than any answer. We've thought about it, he finally admitted. The house is big. There's enough room for everyone. And you wouldn't have to live alone. We could help each other. Help? I smiled bitterly. By throwing out my things? By remodeling my house to suit your taste? By treating me like a frail old man who needs to be looked after? Dad, we're not... No, Declan, I shook my head. You're not helping me. You're invading my territory, step by step, throwing away my things, taking over my rooms, setting your own rules, and you're letting it happen. He was silent for a long time, then sighed. I'll talk to Vanessa. I'll ask her to be gentler. It's not a question of gentleness, son. I shook my head. It's a question of respect, which you don't have. Declan left, and I remained sitting on the bed looking at Lydia's photo on the bedside table. It was the only photo of her that was still in the house. I looked at her smile and thought about what she would say if she saw what was happening in our house now. The next morning began with new improvements. Vanessa hired a cleaning service to come twice a week. You'll have perfect cleanliness now, Morwen, she announced at breakfast. And you won't have to bother with cleaning? I can handle the cleaning myself, I replied. And I don't want strangers in my house. But it's so tiring at your age, she shook her head. Besides, professionals do it much better. You'll see the difference. I didn't argue. What was the point? They do it their way anyway. That evening, I found a large chart attached to the refrigerator in the kitchen. Schedule for use of common areas, read the caption at the top. According to this chart, I could only use the kitchen at certain times, from 6 to 8 in the morning and from 2 to 4 in the afternoon. The bathroom was mine from 5 to 6 in the morning and from 9 to 10 in the evening. The living room was mine from 10 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, when Vanessa worked out in the gym. I tore the piece of paper off the refrigerator, crumpled it up, and threw it in the trash can. When Vanessa returned to the kitchen, she noticed the schedule was missing. Where's the chart? She asked, scanning the walls. In the trash, I replied, where it belongs. But Morwen, she frowned. It's for organizing the common space. So we don't get in each other's way. This is my house. I looked her straight in the eye. And I'll use my kitchen, my bathroom, and my living room whenever I want. Vanessa pursed her lips. You know, Morwen, your stubbornness is making everything more difficult. We're trying to create a comfortable environment for everyone, and you're resisting any change. It's selfish. Selfish? I couldn't believe my ears. You come into my house, throw out my things, occupy my rooms, Tell me when I can use my own bathroom and I'm selfish? Yes, she crossed her arms over her chest. Because you don't think about what's convenient for others. Only about yourself and your habits. I looked at her and suddenly realized that arguing was pointless. For Vanessa, there was only one point of view. Her own. Everything else was stubbornness and resistance to change. I silently left the kitchen, leaving her to talk to the void. In my room, I sat by the window and looked for a long time at the garden where little Declan used to play, where Lydia and I planted apple trees, where life was simple and understandable. Now I felt like a ghost in my own home, a person without a voice, a guest who is tolerated out of politeness, but who prevents the real owners from living the way they want. The next day, when I returned from my walk, the house was full of strangers. They were moving furniture, taking down curtains, measuring things. What's going on? I asked Vanessa, who was supervising the process. Oh, Morwen, she beamed. We decided to update the interior a little. These people are from a design studio. They're going to do a project for us. Can you imagine how beautiful it will be here? I watched as strangers walked around my house, took pictures of the walls, and discussed which partitions could be knocked down and which could be moved. You can't knock down walls without the homeowner's permission, I said. But we're doing what's best, Vanessa patted me on the shoulder. And you'll like the result, I promise. At that moment, I realized I had reached my limit. The boundaries weren't just shifted, they were completely erased. I am no longer the master of my own home. I'm not even a guest. I was a nuisance, an inconvenient old man who, for some reason, still hadn't realized that his time was up. In the evening, when the designers left, leaving behind a pile of sketches and material samples, I sat in my room and sorted through the documents that had miraculously survived the cleanup. Among them was an old title deed, a yellowed piece of paper with seals confirming that this house was mine, that I built it, owned it, and had the right to dispose of it as I saw fit. I held this document in my hands and thought about how legal rights had never been important to me. It was my house not because it was written on paper, but because my soul, my memories, my history lived here. But now that all of this was being systematically destroyed, I was left with only one thing, a cold legal fact. This house belongs to me, and only to me. And for the first time in many weeks, I felt that I still had strength. The strength to protect what was mine. That Tuesday morning, I woke up to the sounds of activity in the kitchen. Someone was clattering dishes, noisily opening and closing cabinets, talking on the phone. The clock showed 6:30 a.m. Even Vanessa didn't usually get up that early. Throwing on an old robe, I went downstairs. My sister-in-law was bustling about in the kitchen, laying out some lists and catalogs on the table. Good morning, like when I said. Vanessa flinched in surprise. Oh, Morwen, she nodded without looking up from her papers. Sorry for the noise, but I have a lot to do today. I walked silently to the cupboard where I kept my tea, but found boxes of some exotic drinks in its place. Where's my tea? I asked. I moved it to the top cupboard, Vanessa replied. I needed to make room for the treats. I looked up. My tea was indeed there on the top shelf, which was uncomfortable for me to reach. Silently, I took a chair, put it under the shelf, and took out the tea. By the way, Morwen, Vanessa finally looked up from her papers. I have an important event on Friday evening. A corporate dinner. Here. I looked at her in surprise. Yes, I invited my colleagues to our house, she smiled. It's a great opportunity to strengthen working relationships and make an impression. They've been wanting to get to know me in an informal setting for a long time. Our house, not your house. Another small shift in boundaries. What does that have to do with me? I asked, making tea. Vanessa paused, then spoke with that particular intonation she used when she was about to say something unpleasant. Actually, Morwen, I wanted to ask you not to show up during dinner. I slowly turned to her. Not show up in my own house? Please understand, she raised her hands in a conciliatory gesture. This is a business meeting, very important for my career. There will be people from the company's management, and if they see, she paused, searching for words. The old man, I suggested. No, she shook her head quickly. It's just that if there's a family atmosphere, it might create the wrong mood. Do you understand? I want to make an impression as a successful, modern professional. I looked at her silently, trying to comprehend what I had heard. I was being asked to hide away like an inconvenient, old thing that was embarrassing to show to guests. And where do you think I should be? I asked. Well, you could spend the evening in your room, she suggested. Or maybe go to the movies. or visit friends. So you want me to leave my own home so you can impress your colleagues? You don't have to leave, she shrugged. Just don't get in the way. It's just for one evening, Morwen. It's really important to me. I looked at her and saw that she didn't even realize how offensive her request was. For Vanessa, it was just a logical part of organizing a successful event, to remove anything that didn't fit into her idea of a modern successful life. Okay, I said finally. I won't interrupt your dinner. Really? She beamed. Thank you, Morwen. I knew you would understand. I didn't explain what I understood. I just took my cup of tea and went to my room. In the evening, when Declan returned, I heard them discussing the upcoming dinner. Vanessa was talking loudly and excitedly. Ere the chef from the Côte d'Azur, he agreed to cook everything here. Can you imagine? And I ordered new tableware, silverware. We need to make an impression. Does Dad know about the party? Declan asked. Yes, I spoke to him this morning, Vanessa replied. He promised not to interfere. Are you sure this is a good idea? Declan's voice sounded doubtful. It is his house after all. Declan, Vanessa's voice became firmer. We've already discussed this. If I want to advance my career, I need connections like this. Besides, it's just one evening. Your father will understand. I quietly closed my bedroom door, not wanting to hear the rest. I was not so much upset by Vanessa's request as by the fact that my own son did not have the strength to object. The next few days were spent in a flurry of preparations for the dinner. People were constantly coming to the house, delivering new tableware, tablecloths, lamps. A florist came and spent a long time arranging flowers that, in my opinion, looked like weeds, but judging by the conversation, cost a fortune. On Thursday, a whole team of cleaners came to the house. They cleaned everything from floor to ceiling, including the windows and even the walls. They cleaned so thoroughly that the house no longer smelled like a house. Now it had a sterile smell of cleaning chemicals and artificial fragrances. On Friday morning, the final preparations began. The chef arrived with his assistants, and the kitchen was transformed into a small restaurant. Vanessa rushed around the house, checking every detail, rearranging flowers and candles, and straightening the napkins on the table. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, she knocked on my door. Morwen, she began without preamble. The guests will arrive at 6. It would be good if you were out of sight by then. I remember your request, I replied, but I'm not going to leave the house. Of course, she nodded quickly. Just try not to leave your room after 6, okay? I've arranged for your dinner to be brought here, as if I were some kind of pet that needed to be fed, but kept away from the guests. No need, I said. I'm not hungry. As you wish, she shrugged. Just please don't go out. It's very important to me. I nodded and she left, clearly satisfied with our agreement. At 5 o'clock, I decided to go for a walk so I wouldn't have to hear the hustle and bustle of the final preparations. I walked through the park, sat on a bench watching the children on the playground, and thought about how strangely my life had turned. 2 months ago, I was the master of my own house. Now I was being asked to disappear, so as not to embarrass the guests with my presence. I returned around 7. I carefully opened the door with my key, trying not to make any noise. Voices, laughter, and the clinking of glasses came from the living room. Apparently, the guests had already arrived, and the party was in full swing. I quietly walked down the hallway to the stairs, intending to slip into my room unnoticed, as I had promised Vanessa. But halfway there, a voice stopped me. "Excuse me, who are you?" I turned around. A young woman stood in the kitchen doorway with a glass of wine in her hand. One of the guests, apparently. "I'm Morwen Tallis," I replied. "I live here." "Oh," she raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Are you Declan's father?" Vanessa didn't say you'd be here too. She didn't. I smiled grimly. "Well, that's not surprising. Why don't you join us?" the woman asked. "There's a very interesting discussion about the real estate market." "I'm afraid I'm not invited," I replied. "How come?" she laughed. "In your own house?" Her words attracted the attention of several other guests who came out into the hallway. "What's going on, Mandy?" asked a tall man in an expensive suit. "I met Declan's father," replied the woman. "Can you believe he says he's not invited to dinner in his own house?" Several people laughed, obviously taking it as a joke. At that moment, Vanessa appeared in the hallway. When she saw me, she froze, her face reflecting a whole range of emotions, from surprise to poorly concealed anger. "Morwen," she smiled tensely, "I thought you were already asleep." "I went out for a walk," I replied, "and I just got back." "Oh, I'm sorry you didn't let me know," her voice tinged with tension. "We could have set an extra place at the table." Don't worry about it, I said. I promise not to interrupt your dinner, and I don't intend to break my promise. I had already turned to go upstairs when the same tall man said, Wait, is this your house, Mr. Tallis? Vanessa said that she and Declan recently bought this beautiful mansion. I slowly turned around. Silence fell over the hallway. All eyes were on me and Vanessa, who had turned pale. Bought, I repeated, looking directly at her. Interesting. I didn't know I was selling my house. Mr. Bridgewater, you misunderstood, Vanessa quickly interjected. Declan and I just recently moved here. It's a family home. But you talked about renovations, about remodeling, the man continued, clearly confused. You showed me the designer's plans. Those were just ideas, Vanessa laughed nervously. You know how it is with young families. So many plans, so many fantasies. By this time, more people had gathered in the hallway, drawn by the unusual situation. Among them was Declan, who looked anxiously from me to Vanessa. What's going on here? He asked. Your wife seems to have sold my house, I replied, not hiding my sarcasm. At least that's what she told her guests. What? Declan looked at Vanessa in confusion. What is he talking about? Nothing, Vanessa snapped. Just a misunderstanding. Morwen, perhaps you should go upstairs. We have an important evening. Of course, I nodded. I won't get in the way of you selling my house. I turned back toward the stairs, but Vanessa grabbed my arm. Enough, she hissed. You're ruining everything. Me? I looked at her hand clutching my sleeve. I just came home. To my home, which, as it turns out, you've already sold in your imagination. Dad, please, Declan intervened. Let's not make a scene. A scene? I raised my voice. So when your wife passes off my house as hers, that's fine. But when I tell the truth, it's a scene? The guests began to exchange glances, clearly feeling uncomfortable. The woman who had spoken to me first said quietly, Marie, maybe we should leave. No, stay, Vanessa quickly objected. It's just a little family misunderstanding. Morwen hasn't been feeling well lately, and sometimes she gets confused. Confused? I couldn't believe my ears. Are you saying I'm losing my mind? Of course not, she smiled tensely. It's just age, you know? My wife Lydia was 10 years older than me when she died, I said, feeling anger boiling up inside me. And until the last day, her mind was razor sharp. So don't blame my dissatisfaction on age, Vanessa. Dad, Declan interjected again. Let's talk about this later. Now is not the time. When is the time, son? I turned to him. When you've completely remodeled my house? Or when you actually sell it? The hallway fell completely silent. All the guests were now watching the unfolding family drama with undisguised interest. Morwen, that's enough, Vanessa tried to take my arm. Come on, I'll show you to your room. I shook off her hand. No need to escort me. I know my way around my own house perfectly well. Stop it, Vanessa suddenly shouted, losing control. You ruin everything, always everything. What exactly am I ruining? I asked calmly. Your lie that this house belongs to you? We live here, she raised her voice. We're making a home here, a life. And you just cling to the past, to old things, to all this junk. Vanessa, Declan said warningly, but she didn't listen to him. You're not letting us live normally, she continued, completely losing her composure. We're trying to create a modern, beautiful home, and you with your old armchairs, books, photographs, it's all long past time to throw it away. Just like all these outdated ideas that you're in charge here. The guests were now openly watching the scene, some even taking out their phones as if to film it. Vanessa, calm down. Declan tried to take his wife by the shoulders, but she pushed him away. No, Declan, it's time to tell the truth. Her face flushed with anger. We can't live like we're in a museum forever. This is our home now, and we'll live in it the way we want to. Your home, I asked quietly. On what basis? On the basis that we live here, she shouted. On the basis that we are young, we have our whole lives ahead of us. And you are just living out your days. And if you really loved your son, you would have transferred the house to him long ago. The hallway fell completely silent. Even Declan froze, shocked by his wife's words. Vanessa, he finally said, you shouldn't have said that. Why? She turned to him. It's true. We've both been thinking about it. Your father sits on this house like it's gold, while we're forced to live in rented apartments. It's not fair. I looked at my son, expecting him to refute his wife's words. But Declan remained silent, his eyes downcast. And that silence told me more than any words could. So that's what this is about, I said slowly. You didn't come here because of problems with your apartment. You came here to take over my house. No, Dad, Declan finally spoke up. We did lose our apartment, but we thought maybe it was a sign that it was time to bring the family together, to live together. Live together, I repeated, throwing out my things, taking over my rooms, setting your own rules, and ultimately pushing me out of here. No one was going to push you out, Vanessa protested. We just wanted to live like human beings, in a modern house, not among this junk. Junk, I nodded. That's what you call my life. My memories. Everything Lydia and I built over the years. I turned to Declan. And you agree with that, son? Do you also consider your parents' life to be junk? Declan stood with his head down, unable to look me in the eye. Dad, we just wanted— Enough, Vanessa interrupted him. Stop apologizing to him. We have a right to our own life, to our own home. And if he doesn't understand that, that's his problem. She turned to me, and in her eyes I saw pure, unadulterated hatred. You don't belong here anymore, she said firmly. Either you accept our rules or you leave. Choose. Vanessa, Declan exclaimed. You can't talk to my father like that. I can, she said, her gaze fixed on me. And I will. This house is too small for the three of us, especially when one of us is living in the last century. I looked at this woman, at my son, at the stunned guest frozen in the hallway, and suddenly I felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if something that had been building up inside me for a long time had finally burst out. You're right, Vanessa, I said calmly. This house really is too small for the three of us. With that, I turned and walked up the stairs, leaving the tense silence behind me. In my room, I took an old travel bag out of the closet, the same one I had used when I went on vacation to the lakes with Lydia. I packed the essentials, a few shirts, pants, underwear, toiletries. Then I carefully wrapped a photo of Lydia, which had been sitting on the nightstand, in a sweater and placed it on top. I took my documents out of the desk drawer, my passport, medical records, bank book, and of course the documents for the house. I put them in the inside pocket of my jacket, close to my heart. When everything was packed, I sat down on the bed and looked around. This room was the last corner that still held my memories, my history. It still smelled of Lydia, her perfume, which I sometimes sprayed on the pillow so I wouldn't forget her scent. Our photos hung on the walls here. The books we read together stood on the shelf here. And now I had to leave all this behind. Leave my own home like a thief. Muffled voices came from downstairs. Apparently, the guests were hurriedly saying goodbye, not wanting to witness a family scandal. I could hear Vanessa trying to save the situation, her falsely cheerful voice saying, No, no, stay, everything's fine. Just a little misunderstanding, but no one seemed to believe in the misunderstanding. Doors slammed. Cars started. The party was hopelessly ruined. After a while, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Then a knock on the door. Dad? Declan's voice sounded uncertain. Can I come in? I didn't answer, and he opened the door himself. Seeing me with my bag, he stopped at the threshold. Are you leaving? As you can see, I zipped up my bag. Your wife made it clear that I'm not welcome here. Dad, that's not what she meant, Declan stepped into the room. She's just upset that things didn't go according to plan. You know how important this dinner was to her. I know, I nodded. And I also know that she told her guests that you bought this house, that you're going to renovate it, that I'm an annoying nuisance. That's not true, he shook his head. We never considered you a nuisance. Really, I looked him in the eye. Then why did you stay silent when she threw out my things? When she turned my study into a gym? When she laid down her rules in my house? Declan looked away. I was trying to find a compromise, he muttered, to make everyone comfortable. No, son, I shook my head. You were just afraid of your wife, afraid to take my side. And you know what? I don't blame you. I was afraid of conflict too. I avoided it my whole life. But sometimes you have to choose a side. I stood up and picked up my bag. Dad, please don't go. Declan blocked my way. We can talk about it. Find a solution. The solution has already been found, I replied. Your wife said it. You don't belong here anymore. And you know what? I agree with her. There's no place for me here anymore. For my things, my memories, my life. All of it is now junk that needs to be thrown away so you can live like human beings. Dad, move aside, Declan. I looked at the son I had once taught to be a man. I'm leaving. He stood motionless for a few seconds, then slowly stepped aside. Where will you go? He asked quietly. Don't worry about that, I replied. I have friends. I walked past him to the door, then stopped and turned around. By the way, I have the documents for the house, just in case your wife decides to continue her game of new owners. With that, I left the room and headed for the stairs. Declan followed me without saying a word. Downstairs in the living room, Vanessa was seeing off the last guests. When she saw me with my bag, she froze. "Are you leaving?" Her voice sounded surprised but not regretful. "As you wished," I replied, "making room for your modern life. But where will you go?" She looked from me to Declan, as if she couldn't believe I was really leaving. "None of your concern," I said, walking past her to the door. I stopped at the threshold and looked back one last time at the house I had built with my own hands, at the walls that held the echoes of Lydia's voice, at the rooms where my son had grown up. Now all of this was becoming foreign to me. It was as if a page in my life had been turned and a new chapter had begun, unexpected and unfamiliar. "Goodbye, Declan," I said without turning around. "I hope you'll be happy in your new home." And I stepped over the threshold, quietly closing the door behind me. The night air was cool and fresh. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange lightness. It was as if I had thrown off the heavy burden I had been carrying for the last few months. With a small bag in my hand, I walked down the street without looking back. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I was sure of one thing. It would be my own path. And this time, I wouldn't let anyone tell me how to follow it. The rain started suddenly. Large drops drummed on the asphalt, forcing me to quicken my pace. I walked through the night streets of Carver's Bridge, clutching the worn handle of my travel bag in my hand, with no clear idea of where I was going. At 73, I found myself homeless, an irony that made me want to smile bitterly. Streetlights reflected in puddles, creating blurry yellow spots of light. The city where I had lived my whole life suddenly seemed foreign and cold. The rain intensified, soaking my jacket, but I kept walking, as if movement could drown out the thoughts swarming in my head. It was only after half an hour that I realized my feet had led me to Adeline Farrow's house. We had been friends for almost 20 years, ever since she was widowed and moved to our street. Lydia often invited her over for tea, and gradually Adeline became part of our little family. After Lydia's death, she was the only one who visited me regularly, bringing homemade baked goods, sometimes just sitting next to me, allowing us to be silent. Her house, a small but cozy cottage with geraniums blooming on the windowsills, glowed with warm light despite the late hour. I stood at the gate for a moment, wondering if it was right to disturb her at this hour, but the rain had soaked me through, and I didn't really have a choice. When I rang the bell, Adeline opened the door almost immediately, as if she had been expecting guests. A short woman with short gray hair and piercing brown eyes, she always reminded me of a bird, quick, energetic, with a sharp gaze that took in everything around her. "Morwen?" She looked at me in surprise, wet and with a bag in my hand. "My God, what happened?" "Sorry for the late visit, Adeline," I said, feeling the water dripping from my clothes. "Can I come in?" "Of course. Of course." She stepped back, letting me into the hallway. "You're soaked to the skin." "Take off your jacket, I'll get you a towel." I stood in her warm hallway, which smelled of cinnamon and apples, and suddenly felt the tension of the last few hours melt away. It was safe here. Here, I wasn't considered junk. Adeline returned with a large towel and a cup of hot tea. "Dry yourself off and drink," she commanded. "Then tell me what happened." In her small living room, sitting in a worn but comfortable armchair, I told her everything. About Declan and Vanessa's arrival, about being gradually pushed out of my own home, about tonight's dinner and the final scandal. Adeline listened without interrupting, only occasionally shaking her head or pursing her lips. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, then said, "That woman is a real harpy, and I'm sorry your son didn't find the courage to stand up to her." "I don't blame Declan," I sighed. "He's always avoided conflict. Even as a child, he preferred to give in rather than argue." And yet, Adeline shook her head, to allow his wife to treat his father that way, it's unforgivable. I stared at the fire in the small fireplace that Adeline had lit to warm me up. The flames reminded me of evenings with Lydia when we sat by the fireplace in our house, making plans, dreaming of the future, of a home that was now lost to me. "You can stay here as long as you need," Adeline said, as if reading my mind. "I have a guest room. It's not as spacious as your bedroom, but it's quite comfortable." "Thank you," I nodded gratefully. "It's only for a few days until I decide what to do next." Take your time, she said, getting up to pour me more tea. Decisions like that aren't made on a whim, especially at our age. That night, I lay awake for a long time in an unfamiliar bed. Rain pattered outside the window, and it seemed to me that I could hear echoes of my entire life in its rhythm. The happy years with Lydia, Declan's birth, his childhood, adolescence, and coming of age. And now this life had brought me here, to a strange house with a small bag of belongings, starting all over again at the age of 73. I woke up late in the morning. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting patterned spots on the floor. The house smelled of fresh baking. I got dressed and went down to the kitchen, where Adeline was already bustling about at the stove. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she greeted me. "How did you sleep in your new place?" "Not bad, thank you." I sat down at the table, where she immediately placed a cup of coffee and a plate of hot rolls. "Eat," she commanded. "You have an important day ahead of you." "Important?" I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "How so?" "Decisions." She sat down opposite me. "You have to decide what to do next, with the house, with your son, with your life." I silently sipped my coffee. Adeline had always been straightforward, a trait I appreciated in her. No beating around the bush, no mincing words. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I never thought I'd have to start from scratch at my age." "A clean slate isn't so bad," she remarked. "Sometimes it's even liberating." I looked at her doubtfully and she smiled. "Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. When Harold died, I thought my life was over, that all I had left was to live out my remaining years reminiscing about the past. But then I realized I could start a new chapter. Do the things I always wanted to do but put off. Be who I want to be, not who others see me as." Her words made me think. All my life I had been defined by roles. Husband, father, breadwinner, master of the house. Who was I now that those roles had disappeared or changed? Who was Moen Tallis without the house he had built? Without the wife he loved? Without the son who respected him? "Do you have the house documents with you?" Adeline asked suddenly. I nodded. "I took them before I left. They're in my bag." "Get them out," she asked. "I want to check something." I went upstairs and came back with the folder where I kept all my important papers. Adeline carefully studied the title deeds, moving her lips as if reading every word to herself. "Just as I thought," she finally said. "The house belongs entirely to you. No co-owners, no encumbrances. You are the sole legal owner." "I know," I shrugged. "But what does that matter now? I can't go back there." "You can't?" She raised her eyebrows. "Or don't you want to?" I thought about it. Was it really true that I couldn't go back? Legally, the house was mine. I could just walk in and demand that Declan and Vanessa move out. But the thought of new conflicts, of shouting, of having to kick out my own son, no, I didn't want that. "I don't want to," I admitted. "I'm tired of fighting for every inch of space, for everything. Tired of feeling like a stranger in my own home." Adeline nodded. "I understand. But do you know what that means? You're free. Free to decide what to do with the house, sell it, rent it out, exchange it. It's yours and only you decide its fate." I looked at the documents, yellowed with age. They contained the entire history of the house, from the purchase of the land to the last roof repair. Each page held a part of my life, and now this paper history was heavier than I had expected. "What if—" I didn't finish, but Adeline understood. "If you sell the house," she shrugged, "then you'll have money for a new place to live. For a new life, without memories that drag you down." The idea of selling the house had previously seemed sacrilegious to me. How could you sell the place where you had spent your entire life, where every corner held memories of Lydia? But now, sitting in someone else's kitchen, I suddenly realized that the house was no longer the place I remembered and loved. Vanessa and Declan had changed it, erased the traces of my and Lydia's life, replaced them with their own. And maybe it was better to let it go for good than to cling to an empty shell. "I'll think about it," I said, gathering the documents back into the folder. Adeline nodded understandingly. "Take your time. You have time." Over the next few days, I walked around Carver's Bridge a lot, trying to avoid the area where my house was. I wandered around the park, sat in the library, and went into small cafes I had never been to before. It was as if I was getting to know the city where I had lived my whole life all over again. Once, sitting on a park bench, I watched a young couple with a small child. They were laughing, taking pictures, looking so happy. And I suddenly remembered how Lydia and I used to walk with little Declan, how we rejoiced at his first steps, His first words. Where and when did we lose that connection? At what point did my son stop seeing me as a support and start seeing me as a hindrance? In the evenings, Adeline and I often sat in her living room, drinking tea and talking. She talked about her life after her husband's death, how she traveled, took painting lessons, and made new friends. I listened and gradually began to understand that life does not end with the loss of familiar landmarks. It simply changes, opening up new opportunities. On the fourth day of my stay with Adeline, the phone rang. She talked to someone for a long time, occasionally glancing at me, then hung up and announced, "We're having a guest tomorrow. Theodore Bridgewater. Do you remember him?" I shook my head. "He owns the Bridgewater and Sons chain of mini markets," Adeline explained. "He already has 5 stores in the area and is looking for a location for a 6th. I thought it might be of interest to you." To me, I didn't immediately understand what she was getting at. "Your house, Morwen," she looked at me searchingly. "It's in a good neighborhood, close to the main road. The perfect place for a small store." I froze, processing her words. Sell the house, not just for the sake of it, but for a store? The idea seemed both shocking and liberating. "I'm not sure," I began, but Adeline interrupted me. "Just talk to him. You don't have to decide right away, but Theodore is a good man, and he offers fair deals." The next morning, I was as nervous as if I were about to take an exam. I went over the pros and cons of selling the house in my mind, trying to imagine how Declan would react if he found out. Several times I was ready to cancel the meeting, but something held me back. Perhaps the thought that this was my chance to finally break the cycle of dependence and start a new life. Theodore Bridgewater arrived at 11 sharp. He was a tall man in his 60s with a neatly trimmed gray beard and attentive blue eyes. He shook my hand firmly, but without excessive force. The handshake of a man who was confident, but not domineering. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Tallis," he said, sitting down in the chair I offered him. "Adeline told me about your situation. My condolences." I nodded, not quite sure what condolences he meant. The loss of my wife or the loss of my home. However, both losses felt like losing a part of myself. "Adeline mentioned that you are considering selling your house," Theodore continued. "I am always looking for good locations for new stores, and if the location is right, I am willing to offer a fair price." "The house is on the corner of Maple and River," I said. "Not far from downtown, but in a quiet neighborhood." "I know that place," Theodore nodded. "It's a good neighborhood growing. Lots of young families are moving there. Perfect for a small grocery store with a coffee shop." We discussed the details, the size of the plot, the layout of the house, the condition of the utilities. Theodore asked specific questions and took notes in a small notebook. He didn't rush me or pressure me. He just gathered information. "I'd like to see the house before making an offer," he said at the end of the conversation. "But I understand that the situation is delicate, considering that your son and his wife are currently living there." I thought about it. The idea of bringing a potential buyer to the house where Declan and Vanessa had set up their modern home seemed both frightening and fair. "I can arrange a viewing," I said. "After all, it's my house, and I have the right to show it to whomever I want." Theodore looked at me intently. "Are you sure you're ready for this? Selling the house you've lived in your whole life is a serious decision." I glanced at Adeline, who was silently watching our conversation. She nodded slightly as if supporting me in whatever I decided. "I wasn't sure until now," I admitted, "but now I realize I'm ready. This house is not what it used to be. Vanessa tried to destroy all the memories I had stored in it. Only the shell remains, and maybe it would be better to let it go than to cling to empty walls." Theodore nodded understandingly. "I respect your decision, and I promise that if we come to an agreement, everything will be done as correctly as possible. No pressure, no hasty actions." We agreed to meet in 2 days to inspect the house. When Theodore left, Adeline sat down next to me and took my hand. "Are you sure you want this, Morwen?" I looked at the house documents, which were still lying on the table. The papers, yellowed with age, held the history of my life. They no longer seemed heavy. On the contrary, for the first time in a long time, I felt light. It was as if the decision I had made had lifted a burden that I had been carrying for too long. "Yes," I replied, "and I'm sure. It's time to move on." Friday morning was clear and sunny, as if nature itself was blessing my intentions. I woke up early, when the first rays of sunlight were just beginning to shine through the curtains in Adeline's guest room. I lay there staring at the ceiling and thinking about the day ahead. Today I was to return to the house I had built, lived in all my life, and was now about to sell. A strange feeling, a mixture of determination, anxiety, and a kind of liberation, would not leave me. At breakfast, Adeline noticed my tension. "Are you nervous?" she asked, pouring me some tea. "A little," I admitted. "It's not every day you return home as a seller. Are you sure you don't want to warn Declan?" Adeline looked at me intently. "It might be a shock for them." I shook my head. "If I warn her, Vanessa will prepare herself. She'll build up her defenses, and I want to see her real reaction. I want her to understand what it means to kick someone out of their own home." Adeline didn't argue. She just nodded. "I understand, but be prepared for her to make a scene. I've lived under the same roof with her for 2 months," I smiled. "I'm ready for her scenes." Theodore Bridgewater arrived at 10 o'clock sharp, as we had agreed. He pulled up in a black sedan, elegant but not ostentatiously expensive, just like Theodore himself. He was dressed in a business suit, but without a tie, with a leather briefcase under his arm. "Are you ready, Mr. Tallis?" he asked, shaking my hand. "Morven, please," I corrected him. "And yes, I'm ready as ever." We drove in silence for the first few minutes. Then Theodore asked, "Did you warn your son about our visit?" "No," I shook my head. "I think it will be a surprise for them." Theodore glanced at me quickly but said nothing. I appreciated his tact. Many would have started asking questions and giving advice, but he respected my decision. When we pulled up to the house, I felt my heart quicken. Outwardly, it looked the same as it had on the day I left. The same brick facade, the same apple trees in the garden, the same tiled roof that I had covered with my own hands 5 years ago. But now I looked at it with different eyes. Not as a refuge, but as a property I was going to sell. "Good location," Theodore remarked, looking around. "Corner lot, visible from 2 streets, perfect for a store." I nodded, taking the keys out of my pocket. They were still with me. A small symbol that I was still the legal owner of this house. We approached the door, and without hesitation, I inserted the key into the lock. It was a familiar movement that I had made thousands of times, but today it felt different, like an act of restoring justice. The door opened, and we entered the hallway. Inside, the house had changed even more than I remembered. New wallpaper, new furniture in the living room, which was visible from the hallway, some fashionable lamps on the walls. Only the shell of my old home remained. "Who's there?" Vanessa's voice came from deep inside the house. "Declan, is that you back?" I heard footsteps, and then she appeared in the hallway, freezing when she saw us. She was wearing a bathrobe, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, clearly not expecting visitors. "Morwen!" Her eyes widened in surprise. What are you doing here?" "Hello, Vanessa," I replied calmly. "I'm here to show my house to a potential buyer." "This is Mr. Bridgewater, the owner of a chain of mini-markets." Theodore nodded politely, but Vanessa ignored him, her astonished gaze fixed on me. "A buyer?" She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Are you going to sell the house?" "That's right," I stepped forward, entering deeper into the hallway. "I hope we're not disturbing you too much. We need to inspect all the rooms, assess the condition of the utilities, and discuss the details." Vanessa stood there with her mouth open, unable to find the words. Then, as if coming to her senses, she quickly wrapped her robe around herself and said, "But Yavor, you can't just come in here and—" "Does Declan know about this?" "About what exactly?" I asked. "That I am the owner of the house and have every right to sell it?" "I think he is aware of that." I walked past her into the living room, gesturing invitingly for Theodore to follow me. Vanessa remained standing in the hallway, clearly unsure of what to do. "As you can see, Mr. Bridgewater," I began in a businesslike tone, "the living room is spacious, with 2 large windows. The ceilings are high, which provides ample space for display cases or shelving. It has central heating, but I had additional underfloor heating installed 5 years ago." Theodore carefully examined the room, taking notes in his notebook. Vanessa finally snapped out of her stupor and hurried after us. "Wait!" Her voice trembled with poorly concealed anger. "You can't just come in and look around the house like that. We live here." "With my permission," I replied calmly, continuing to show Theodore the features of the layout. "And judging by what you told me at our last meeting, I no longer belong here. So I've found another use for this house." Vanessa turned pale. "You can't sell the house while we're still living here. It's illegal." Theodore coughed politely. "Actually, ma'am, if Mr. Tallis is the sole legal owner of the property, he has every right to dispose of it as he sees fit, including selling it." "But we're his family," Vanessa exclaimed. He can't throw us out on the street. As I understand it, Theodore remarked, continuing to take notes, it was you who threw Mr. Tallis out on the street a few days ago. Even though he is the legal owner of this house, Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it, unable to find a response. I saw understanding gradually dawn in her eyes, the realization that she had made an irreparable mistake by kicking out not just an annoying old man, but the person who provided the roof over her head. The kitchen is here. I continued the tour, ignoring her confusion. It's spacious with access to the garden. The utilities were updated 3 years ago. There's a gas stove, an electric oven, and enough space to install commercial equipment if you plan to include a coffee shop or bakery in the store. We methodically walked through the entire first floor. The kitchen, the dining room, the small study that Vanessa had turned into a gym. Theodore examined everything carefully, asking specific questions about the wiring, pipes, and foundation. I answered clearly and to the point, as if we were talking about a regular piece of real estate rather than the house where I had lived my entire life. Vanessa followed us like a shadow, not daring to interfere anymore, but not leaving either. Her face grew paler with every minute, with every new room we inspected as a potential commercial space. When we went up to the second floor, I felt something tighten inside me. This was where Lydia and I had slept, where Declan had been a child, a small room we used as a guest room. Now everything was changed beyond recognition. New wallpaper, new furniture, no trace of the life that had been here before. The second floor could be used as a storage room or an office, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The ceilings are lower than on the first floor, but the space is well organized. Vanessa stopped in the doorway of the bedroom she shared with Declan, our former bedroom with Lydia. You can't do this, she said quietly. You can't sell the house where your son grew up. I turned to her. I can't? That's strange. When you threw out my things, took over my rooms, and set your own rules, you didn't think about the fact that you were doing it in the house where I had lived my whole life, where my wife died, where every corner held my memories. Vanessa was silent, and for the first time since we'd known each other, I saw something like remorse in her eyes. Or maybe it was just fear of losing the roof over her head. This would make a great office, I continued, showing Theodore Declan's former nursery, or a break room for the staff. We finished the tour in my old room, the only one that had remained almost untouched since I left. The bed was made. There was a lamp on the nightstand, but the place where Lydia's photo used to hang, the one I took with me, was empty. Well, said Theodore, closing his notebook, I've seen enough. The house is in excellent condition. The location is perfect for my purposes. I'm ready to make an offer. We went back down to the living room. Vanessa followed us like a shadow, still without saying a word. I saw her nervously fiddling with the belt of her robe, her eyes darting around as if looking for a way out of the situation. Theodore opened his leather folder and took out some documents. I have prepared a preliminary contract. Of course, the final amount will depend on the appraisal, but I am ready to offer. He named a figure that took my breath away. It was much more than I had expected. Enough to buy a new apartment and still have enough left over for a comfortable retirement. That's a very generous offer, I said, trying to hide my surprise. The location is worth it, Theodore smiled. Besides, I can see how much love and care has been put into this house. It will serve for many years to come, even after being converted into a store. I took the pen he handed me and signed the preliminary contract. Then Theodore took out his checkbook and wrote a check for the deposit, 10% of the total amount. This guarantees the seriousness of my intentions, he said, handing me the check. The rest will follow after all the paperwork is done and the premises are vacated. I took the check, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Relief, sadness, triumph. It was the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of another. When Vanessa's voice faltered and she cleared her throat. When do we need to vacate the house? Theodore looked at me, giving me the right to answer. I could have said immediately. I could have given them a week or two. But instead I replied, the contract specifies a period of 30 days. I think that's enough time to find new accommodation. Vanessa nodded without looking at me. Her shoulders slumped, as if the rod that had kept her upright all these months had been removed. Suddenly, she no longer seemed like a formidable opponent, but simply a frightened woman afraid of the unknown. Does Declan know? She asked quietly. No, I replied, but you can tell him when he gets back. I think he'll be interested to know that you kicked out of the house not just an annoying old man, but its rightful owner. Vanessa flinched as if she had been struck. Understanding flashed in her eyes, full realization of what she had done. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then closed it and lowered her eyes. Theodore, sensing the tension, coughed tactfully. I think we're done for today. I'll contact you in a couple of days, Morwen, to discuss the details of the deal. We shook hands and Theodore headed for the door. I followed him, but stopped at the door and turned around. Vanessa was still standing in the middle of the living room, small and lost among the new furniture she had so carefully chosen for her home. You know, I said, without raising my voice, when you threw away my things, I felt exactly the way you do now. Helpless. Out of control of my own life. I hope you remember that feeling, and never do that to another person again. With that I left, closing the door gently behind me. It was still sunny outside, but now the light seemed different to me. Not just warm, but promising, as if there was not emptiness ahead, but a new road, new opportunities. Are you okay? Theodore asked, looking at me intently. I nodded. Yes, for the first time in a long time, I'm really okay. We got into his car and drove away from the house. I didn't look back, but I knew Vanessa was watching us from the window, watching the man she considered a hindrance drive away, the man who turned out to be the master of her destiny. The drive back to Adeline's house was silent. I held the check in my hand, glancing at the amount from time to time, as if I couldn't believe it was real. My house, which I had built with my own hands, which I loved and had lived in all my life, would soon become a store. The walls that had echoed with Lydia's voice would be torn down. The rooms where Declan grew up would be turned into sales rooms or warehouses. And strangely, the thought didn't hurt. On the contrary, there was something right about it, something final. It was as if the house, having lost its purpose as a family home, was finding a new life, a new purpose. You know, and I said, breaking the silence, I used to dream that this house would pass to Declan, and then to his children, that my family would always live here. Theodore nodded. That's often the way it is. We make plans and life goes its own way. Yes, I agreed, but maybe that's even better. The house will serve people, other families who will come for groceries, for bread, for milk. There will be life and movement in it, not a museum of the past that Vanessa tried so hard to erase. Theodore glanced at me quickly. You're a wise man, Morwen. Not everyone is capable of seeing things that way. I shrugged. It's not wisdom, just experience. At my age, you begin to understand that what matters is not what you lose, but what you do with it. When we pulled up to Adeline's house, I saw her in the window. She was waiting for us, watching the street. When she saw the car, she came out onto the porch. Well, she asked when we got out of the car. I silently showed her the check. Her eyes widened in surprise. My God, Morwen, that's a fortune. Enough for a new start, I said. And maybe a new house, smaller of course, but my own. Adeline smiled, and in her eyes I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A warmth that went beyond simple friendship. How did Vanessa take the news, she asked, inviting us into the house. Like someone who suddenly realized she had kicked out not an annoying old man, but the rightful owner of the house, I replied, with shock and horror. Adeline couldn't help but smile. I admit, it's hard for me to feel sorry for her after everything she's done. Me too, I agreed. But you know what's strange? I don't feel any schadenfreude, only relief, as if I've finally escaped from the trap I locked myself in. We went into the house and Adeline offered tea to celebrate the successful deal. Sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of hot tea in my hands, I thought about how strangely my life had turned out. 2 weeks ago, I was the master of my own house, then a homeless old man, and now a man with a large check and the opportunity to start all over again. Theodore soon took his leave, promising to contact me in the next few days to finalize the paperwork. When the door closed behind him, Adeline sat down opposite me. Are you really okay, Morwen? It was your home for so many years. I thought about it. Was I okay? Did I feel a sense of loss? Did I regret my decision? You know, I replied slowly, a home isn't just walls. It's memories, feelings, the people you love. Vanessa and Declan destroyed all that while I was still living there. What I sold was just a shell. What really matters, I touched the breast pocket where I kept Lydia's photo, is always with me. Adeline smiled and covered my hand with hers. Then I'm happy for you. And for your new beginning. I looked at her hand, warm and reassuring, and thought about how sometimes loss opens the door to something new. something you couldn't even imagine while clinging to the past. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Free from the burden of the past, from obligations, from expectations. Free to choose my own path. And Vanessa, she learned a lesson that I hope she will remember forever. A lesson that the real master is not the one who shouts the loudest or exerts the most pressure, but the one who has the legal right and enough wisdom to use it at the right moment.